Good evening. Today's event, titled Parenting and Chinuch Gems, was coordinated and sponsored by the Mintz family, Lili Nishmas, their father, Rabbi Isaac Mintz. Despite passing away at a young age, Rabbi Mintz nevertheless dedicated over 30 years of his life, from when he was a bacher, to chinuch, and especially to the chinuch of his family, very much with the encouragement of the Rebbe. Therefore, very appropriately, the Mintz family has a custom of organizing a chinuch event annually in the month of Cheshvan, Lili Nishmas, their father. This year, B'Hashgacha Pratis, the event takes place tonight on Beis Cheshvan, which is the actual date of his yahrtzeit. Tonight is the 30th yahrtzeit of Rabbi Isaac Gershon ben Avram Zev Olav Shalom Mintz. Yehi Zichrei Baruch, and tonight's event is dedicated to him. This evening, the format will primarily be a chinuch panel with questions and answers. On your chairs, you have blank cards, and if you have a chinuch question that you would like to see tonight's panel address, you can take the time to write down the question. Please write it as clearly as possible, and then when we get to the panel, you'll be able to pass it up, and we will try to get to all the questions. But before we begin with the panel, we will have an opening presentation by Rabbi Shmuel Lu. Rabbi Shmuel Lu is a seasoned educator, senior shliach in London, the director of education for Chabad of the UK, the principal of the senior girls' school for over 45 years. He also mentors hundreds of shluchim and anash and moistis and lectures all around the world. It is our honor to have Rabbi Lu with us here tonight. Rabbi Lu.
So it's Hakel. And where does chinuch come into Hakel? There's a powerful, maybe a one-liner from the Rebbe, where it says the famous posuk, Hakel es ha'am, v'anoshim v'anoshim v'hataf. Gather together the men, the women, the children. So the question is asked in the Gemara, reflected in Rashi, Ha'anoshim ba'lilmoid. The men came to learn. The women came to hear. V'hataf lamabon. Why did the children come? So it's a famous statement. L'asais socha l'meviyehem, to give reward to the ones that bring them. So the Rebbe asks, why do you need the taf to give reward to the ones that bring them? They already have reward for being present themselves. What kind of a reward is it that's different in kind, not just in degree? And the Rebbe says that the key is in the next pasuk. Uvanecha asher lo yodu yishma'u v'yilmadu l'yira es Hashem kol hayomim asher atem chayim al ha'adama. I'm not sure if it's quote, but he has the word kol hayomim. The Rebbe said this is something for all time. And the schar, the reward for what we do in chinuch, is not just something which is immediate. Everyone gets a schar which is unlimited. But when you put attention and time and effort into the chinuch of children, you are creating something for generations and generations to come, kol hayomim, for all time. So I want to share with you, before we have the panel with our illustrious colleagues, a couple of thoughts about chinuch. I want to tell you, number one, about how to look at a child. And number two, very practical general advice from the Rebbe in a Sikha about chinuch and about parenting. First of all, I was in Yechidus. I had a weakness, I would lose it with children, and I asked the Rebbe what to do. This was Friday afternoon, Isru Chag Shavuos, Tovshin Lamed Gimel, 1973, and the Rebbe said, his boinanus, just reflect and internalize that as much as they are your children, they are Hashem's children. Bonam atem l'Hashem alekechem. So when you want to talk about method and situations and consultations, before you start anything, we have to realize, because children can be very challenging. Pupils can be very challenging, and certainly children at home, they're yours. You've got to deal with them. And they can look like brats and whatever. I'll tell you, I got a phone call, Erev Pesach, Tov Shin Pei Aleph, 2021. This a year and a half ago. It was a 3-day Yom Tov. Remember, Shabbos was Erev Pesach. The Seder was Motzi Shabbos. It was not during the time of lockdown, but there was social distancing. And we had nobody coming into the house. They used to deliver the things and drop it off at the doorway. And here, my wife and I, without any help, are preparing for Pesach. Normally, it was 90% her and 10% me. Maybe then it was 12% me, 13% me. But I still was wearing the plastic gloves. I just remember it was in the afternoon, Friday afternoon. It was after mikveh already, and I was peeling or grinding, doing something, and the phone rings. An overseas call from a Malamed, who I once spoke in the town where he teaches, and I attended a class of his, and I was very impressed, but he never ever called me before or since. I said, what can I do for you? He said, I have a problem. What's the problem? He said, I have a problem with the Haggadah. I said, what's the problem? He said, it says that there's a Ben Rosha. And he screamed out in the phone. I get choked up when I even think about it. He said, it's not true. Just like that, with that tone. It's not true. Why label him? I get choked up because that's what bothered him on night of Pesach, 3 days. He was also busy. And I thought of something. I said, somebody might have a different answer. I said that it's all in a sicha of the Rebbe. It doesn't say in the Haggadah, Keneged Abor Bonim, that there are 4 sons, Chacham, Rosha, Tam, She'eni Yedei Lishol. It says Echad Chacham, V'echad Rosha, V'echad Tam, V'echad She'eni Yedei Lishol. The first word which defines him is Echad. There's a neshama in that person. And the Haggadah is telling you that you should look on him and persuade him that he has a deeper part to himself. Don't whitewash it. There's a problem. He's behaved like a Russia, maybe. But that's not what defines him. What defines him is the Echad. And you look on him in that way, or her, and try to reach that. Try to get them to be aware that that's how you view them. That's how the Rebbe looked at a child, looked at a Yid. That as the Rebbe is a kind. Now the Rebbe said in his Sicha, in Yud Aleph Nisan, I think it was Tavshin Mem Beis, the 2 rules in chinuch, in parenting, is number 1, as it says, and we say every morning in Rebbeinu Tam's Tefillin, V'gadato levincha, talk to your child, communicate. Get into their world. Talk to the child when they're 5, and she or he will come to you. You'll be one of the people they'll talk to when they're 15 or 18. Talk to them. Speak. obviously it's words of Torah, but it's also, just generally speaking, there's a lot of concern and care for children today, but because of the whole lifestyle and because of the distractions and the pressures that are there on every person, a parent can be with a child and doing something very good, but everyone's on their own phone, everyone is distracted, there's not much conversation going on. I tell parents, someone asks me, how can I handle the kids? They argue, this, that, a table full of children. And what I say is, turn off the phone. Don't just put it on vibrate. Turn it off between 4 and 6 p.m. Whatever hour or two that you're going to choose. But have a time. The fact that children are, families, a lot of children, not always that easy to manage, but it's a beautiful thing. It's teaching children, that in itself is part of the chinuch, to teach them how everyone is precious, to have time for each one, to speak to them, to talk to them. Well, I see sometimes, I'm in Stanford Hill, there's about 40,000 from Yidden. I see people going with their children to school or walking the street, and they're on the phone. You should look for excuses to take the child. You're going out to get gas in the car or whatever it is. Take a kid with and just talk with them. Have an open line of communication with your child. That's the first step. What to say, how to say, that's the second step. But to show that positive interest. The second thing, which the Rebbe said, is for the parent to be a dugma chaya. Be a role model of what you expect. And the Rebbe said it in a very fantastic way. He said, you know, every child looks up to the parent as something very special. And every child says to themselves, halavai, I wish I would just be half of what my parent is. And therefore, whatever you want your child to be, you yourself be double that. So then when they're half of what you are, they will do it. And that means being an example is not in the direct communication. This is the indirect. It's the atmosphere in the home. It's what you have in the house, what you don't have in the house. It's how you speak to your own parents, or how you speak to other people, how you parents speak to each other. I'll tell you something that this Friday night I was at a Shalom Zocha. That was a double Shalom Zocha in a city. And the grandfather of one of those two baby boys was a person whose father is not Jewish. And his mother obviously is Jewish. And he was brought up as a Jew. I've met him years ago in other city. He's a Lubavitcher in Germany. He was brought up like conservative or reform, but Jewish, with a Jewish identity. And then he became frum in his teenage years. Now he's Lubavitcher with a kapata. He was the grandfather of the child. And what I didn't know is that there were about 30 people sitting around there in this big Shalom Zocha. One of the people sitting in the corner was a guy with a yarmulke, was his father. And he said, I want to say something. This was Friday night, but I went to him Sunday, and I said, I'm speaking on chinuch. You mind? He says, Adarabba, I'd be happy, even with my name, I don't mind. But that's not relevant. And he said he wanted to share with the 30 or so people that were there a conversation he had with his father. He said his father had a Friday night meal with the family every Friday night. They didn't keep Shabbos. After that meal, they would go to a football game, they went to entertainment, whatever. But that was something which happened in the family that they did. And they went to shul, which means Yom Kippur, maybe Rosh Hashanah, but he only said about Yom Kippur. He said he would come and he went with us, he put on a talis, and he put on a yarmulke, and he sat there the whole day. So when he was an adult already, and he was frum, and Chaz said he has today about 6 children, and they're all frum. One of them was the father of the baby. He asked his father, "Why did you do this? You're a Muslim." He's a father. So the father said, "Look, I believe in God, and I want my child to believe in God. And I wanted my wife is going to bring up that child as a Jew. And if there is going to be a conflict between her and me, the end result is we'll be played against each other, at least in the mind of the child. And they certainly will not be religious, or they won't be as religious as they could be. And I did it in order that there should be a smooth transition through the generations." Now, lahavdil, this is not Baruch Hashem, it's not the situation that any of us has. But b'ze'er anpin, in a miniature way, when there is open conflict between parents, the casualties are the children. The shalom bayis is necessary for the v'shinantam levonecha and for the v'higadato levincha. That's the message that one sends. Now, it could be that there are differences of opinion. That's normal. When I first started going to universities, it was here in the early 60s, and there was a student, I remember him, and he wrote to the Rebbe a long letter, various questions in Emunah. And one of them was, how can the Torah be holy and true if there's so much machlokes in the Gemara? There's so many arguments between everybody. So the Rebbe wrote him back a very beautiful English letter, and the Rebbe said that you find in the Torah that is a normal thing for there to be different views. The halacha is a different story. The way that you're supposed to act, but the discussion and how you get to whatever the decision is. And the Rebbe gave an example. The first machlokes in the Torah is between Avraham and Sarah. And the Rebbe says that Avraham wanted Shmuel to stay at home. And Sarah said, and the Eibishter said, the Eibishter Paskin, the Psak Din is like Sarah Shma B'Koila. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen. That was a Psak Din. I thought it was, I was a Bacher in 770, but this was a fascinating thing to me. I think I was after the Chasna already. The Rebbe was saying that you have a machlokes like in the Gemara, it's in the Chumash. It's normal. So there can be different views, but there's a decision. There's somehow or another, if you consider the safety, the spiritual benefit of the child to be paramount, then you reach a decision. You go to Mashpia, you go to a Rav, you speak together, you go to a specialist, you go to a professional, whatever it is. But as far as the child is concerned, there should be a respect between the parents, a respect between parents and their own parents. These are all things which children pick on. Because before Yom Tov, it could be very difficult. Very difficult. And what the simcha that is there, even though it's something which is difficult, knowing this is what's right, is something which will communicate itself to the generations. The simchas hachayim that there is, the confidence. Simcha is not necessarily going at tinsel and singing a niggin. It helps, but the big thing about simcha is that there's a certain confidence that what I'm doing is the right thing. It's not something which is a drag. It's not something which is difficult. It's not easy, but it's right. It says in the Gemara, Noyach loy la'odam, she'loy nivra. The Gemara has a machlokes. Somebody phoned me up a few weeks ago. 2.5 years, the Gemara says, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argued whether it's Noyach la'odam she'nivra, is it good for the person that they were born, or is it not good? And I had a whole conversation, a half hour with this person, but the Nekuda, I said, the Gemara doesn't say Toiv la'odam. It's good. It says Noyach, it's comfortable. That's why there was a 2.5 year discussion, because when you really love somebody, when you really feel for somebody, the test of that love is when you do something which is not comfortable for them. Doing what's comfortable is loving yourself. I told this guy was on going from Flatbush to New Jersey to his job. I said, do you have time? He said, I got an hour because I'm driving to work. I said, do you go on Sundays? Do you drive to work? He said, we don't have work on Sunday. I said, so you go, you're leaving your wife, you enjoy her company, and spending an hour each direction in the car. It's not Noach, but it's Toiv. The proof that it's not Noach is that you don't do it on a Sunday. In other words, there are things in life which are correct, and a child senses this, that a person is doing, the parent is doing what's the right thing to do, and there's an inner bliss, an inner good feeling that comes from it, even if it doesn't express itself in the most obvious way. So again, I say for fathers, the mothers, the time of lichtbenchen, you sit with daughters, that 10, 15 minutes after lichtbenchen is a golden opportunity, even if you're just, especially in the winter, even in the summer, everyone's exhausted when Shabbos comes in, but before you just sit down or lie down, spend 10 minutes, sing a niggin, say a story, talk to your daughters. And the same thing with fathers, look for the opportunity. Turn off the phone when you're in that car. You're going for just a relatively short ride, just to say, how are you? How are you doing? So those are the things I would like to share as opening words, things about Chinuch, which I time-tested and I based on Sichos of the Rebbe, that we should look at our children in a positive way, see them as the Rebbe's Kinder. The Rebbe told me, as wie viel sind deine Kinder, sind sie dem Eibishten's Kinder. Bonem atem al Hashem alekechem. The Rebbe quoted the pasuk. They are God's children. It's not with that. Talk to them. And try to spruce up your own personal, not when you're giving them a speech or something, just your personal behavior, the example that one gives, the indirect education that emerges from this is priceless. The Rebbe says, we should have everyone have nachas and kinder and einekluch and oireintluch, and we should see Mashiach now.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Lou, for the beautiful opening presentation. You covered so many points. I think we just shortened the event because you answered many people's questions already. As mentioned at the opening, tonight's event is organized and sponsored by the Mintz family, Lili Nishmas, their father, Rabbi Isaac Mintz, whose yahrtzeit is tonight. The Mintz family asked me to thank my father, Rabbi Lustig Sr., for his guidance and encouragement throughout all the years standing behind this event, to thank Rabbi Mendel Blau for arranging tonight's event, and to thank all the local yeshivas for encouraging their parent body to attend, Ali Torah, Lubavitch Yeshiva Crown Street, Lubavitch Yeshiva Ocean Parkway, Or Menachem, Darchei Menachem, Cheder Ta'ayel, Beis Rivka, Benos Menachem, Beis Chaim Mushka, Benos Chamesh, and all the schools of Crown Heights who joined together in the spirit of Hakel for tonight's parenting event. Tonight is a Hakel. There are different kinds of Hakels. On Chalamoid, Crown Heights had a beautiful community Hakel. In yeshiva, sometimes we have a class hakel, a grade hakel, a division, a school-wide hakel. On my block where I live, there's a block hakel once a month. Tonight's hakel is a parenting hakel. It's a hakel of parents who are all coming together, l'man yishmu, l'man yilmudu, to get better at what we do. Because parenting is hard. Parenting isn't easy. We even have a harder job than Noach from this week's parsha. Noach had to build a teva because there was a mabel out there. A lot of thought had to go into making that teva. It had to be a safe place, it had to be a healthy place, it had to be efficient, it had to function. You had to have 3 floors, the garbage, the people, the animals, there was different rooms. You had to have a system of feeding them. And that was a very, very tough job. As parents, we have a similar job, if not even a harder job. There's a mabel out there. There's the whole world out there. Like Rabbi Lu said, there's the pressures, there's the temptations, the anxieties, there's raging waters, there's a storm. And as parents, our job is to build that teva, our home, that safe and secure place, physically safe, emotionally safe, in a very healthy way, and of course, spiritually safe. But unlike the teva, where Noach brought his family and those animals, and he stayed in the teva throughout, and they rode out the storm, and he only sent them back out when everything calmed down, we let our children out of our homes every single day, and we put them out on the streets with their friends and whoever else they're meeting. So our homes have to be so strong and so powerful and so reassuring to our children that they should be strong enough that when they go out into the storm on a daily basis, they should always have those yahrtzeit of that chinuch that they received in the comfort of their home. And one of the things that Noach had to do in the teva, he had to do many things to prepare for the teva. Not all of it is clearly spelled out in the psukim. But one of the things that the pasuk actually tells Noach to do, which is an obvious thing to do, is to create a source of light for the teva. Tzayar tasa l'teva. Rashi brings down 2 pirushim. Tzayar is either a window, or tzayar is either a gem, a stone, that gives off light. So in a classic Rashi Sikha in the Chelik Yud of Likutei Sichos, there has a whole Sikha. Why did Rashi have to give 2 pirushim? What's wrong with each one? Why is this one first? Why is this one second? But at the end of that Sikha, the Rebbe says the Yeina Shel Torah. And the Rebbe says, let's analyze this for a moment. What is essentially the difference between the light of the window and the light of the stone? And the answer is simple. The light of the window is an external light. It's coming from outside. You had something blocking you. You had the walls of the teva. So you didn't have to create that light. You just had to remove something that's blocking the light, put a window there, so now the light could come through. The light of the stone, the thing itself, is what's shining. In Avodas Hashem, this is the part that the Rebbe says over there in the Sikha. In Avodas Hashem, our job is to light up the world. So sometimes we can light up the world by just being there and shining in the world and spreading Yiddishkeit and the Eibishter and the Likus. But the thing itself still didn't, so there's nicht der Numen. The thing itself is still not lit up. The higher level of lighting up the world around us is when we make the world around us, not just that we remove the michsa and we remove what's blocking the light. The higher level is when we get the world around us to be tzayar tasel teva, that we do is hapcha. We take everything and we transform it into something that it itself is good and that it itself is shining. And as parents, that's part of what we want to do. When our children are younger, we're there with them. We're there with them, we put them to sleep. We're there with them when they get up in the morning. We see them off to school. We greet them after school. And we could be that window for them. And we could be that shining light for them. And the school could be that shining light for them. But the goal is that we should raise children who are also doing tzeimin al teva, and they're going to leave your home, and they're going to leave yeshiva, and they're going to get older. And we should raise children who should be healthy and strong, begashmius and beruchnius. They should be at tzayar and be in a position of lighting up the world around them. So to help us do our job, we have like Rabbi Lu said, illustrious panel here with us tonight. We have Rabbi Zalman Markowitz. He's a renowned educational consultant, sought after mechanech and mentor to shluchim and anash and Chabad schools worldwide. With over 35 years of experience in the field of chinuch, he regularly travels around the world to help individuals and communities and schools and shluchim. Thank you, Rabbi Markowitz, for being here with us. To Rabbi Markowitz's right, we have Dr. Dovid Schwarz, who's a highly respected and admired licensed psychologist and psychotherapist in our community. He's a fellow chassid and a professional counselor for over 40 years, focusing on evaluation and prevention and the diagnosis and treatment of mental and emotional and behavioral challenges. And Rabbi Shmuel, for those who missed the introduction, who just gave a beautiful opening introduction, who's a seasoned educator, shliach in London, principal in the senior girls' school for over 45 years, who also regularly travels and consults hundreds of moistus and shluchim and nanash in chinuch. Tonight's event depends on you. We need questions. It's a panel. It's a question and answer panel, and I appreciate, Rabbi Lou, that you mentioned about machlekes, and that it's okay to have a machlekes, because perhaps there could be a machlekes in the panel, but we need a halacha at the end of the day. So everybody has cards on their chairs when you came in, and if you would like to take a moment, if you have a question, a chinuch, that you would like to see addressed by the panel, we will try to get to all of them. Please write it down as clearly as possible so we don't have a hard time reading it, and we will read out the question to the panel. You may choose to have your question open-ended or to direct your question to one of the panelists specifically. In advance of tonight's event, to be able to start off before everybody gets their pens, and if people still carry those, if somebody needs, I have one up here. We asked a group of parents in advance to submit their questions, and we have a couple of questions that came in yesterday and today. So we would like to begin with those questions. As mentioned, some of them are addressed specifically to one of our members on the panel. Some of them are open-ended. Our first question for tonight is addressed to you, Rabbi Lou. What can parents do when they feel overwhelmed between parnasa, ongoing pressures of life, shalom bayis, etc., yet being the calm, thoughtful, and effective parents we are meant to be?
Wow. That's a good question. From time to time, there are many coping mechanisms. Generally in life, there's a lot of things happening in life. So it's important to have a direction. It's important to be able to talk to someone. It's important to be able to see a thread, a purpose in everything that a person is doing, having a mashpia, having a relationship with your husband, speaking with a wife. It's just generally in life, with all of these things, I think that the best thing is to be able to contemplate in how these overwhelming aspects are really a treasure. They're leading to something. It's like I mentioned before, the Gemara says, it's not Noach lo. The Gemara says, Noach lo sholoi nivra. It would be more comfortable if a person were not created. But the ultimate, but it's good though, because the ultimate love and the ultimate purpose and the ultimate achievement comes about through doing something which is not comfortable. Rabbi Isaac Mintz, if I could tell a little thing, I came here for a hakliyel. I very rarely came Tishrei, because the Rebbe told me the night before we left on Shlichus, it was the end of Av, and he said, Elul and Tishrei is as man mesugul todem and jugend. Elul and Tishrei are very auspicious to work with young people. But I came, and I wanted to daven with the Rebbe, and Rabbi Mintz came to me, and he said, you're going to Jersey City, was it? You're going to Jersey City, New Jersey, to the Rogozin High School to speak to the kids. Chalamoy Tzukis. It was not comfortable. But I know Rabbi Mintz. I knew him since I was 10 years old, going to a Shalosh Shudis in the Young Israel in Williamsburg on Rodney Street. And I knew him from Montreal, where he worked on Chinuch. It's not comfortable. So in the same way, you fast forward to your life as a spouse, as a parent, as someone that has things to do, and it gets a bit complicated. You need coping mechanisms. So that you need a lot of discussion with people. But underlying it is the fact that you are working on achieving something, on creating something. The sign that you care about someone. I asked someone once, do you have any friends? And he said, I have a lot. He was a very extroverted, popular kind of a person. He said, but if you mean someone that at 3 o'clock in the morning I have a crisis, I could phone him up and get some help, 1 or 2. That 1 or 2, sleeping in your bed for 8 hours, undisturbed, that's comfortable. Getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to help somebody, that's not so comfortable, but it's a deeper part of yourself which does it. But there's also a third level, an even deeper level, which feels comfortable because I was ready to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. In other words, it's not just I'm forced, so I have to difficulties because he's supposed to raise children, and the Eibishter wants this, and the Rebbe wants that, and my friends want this, and my Yomi Rabrias, all of these reasons that contribute to a person's feeling of being overwhelmed, and one does it with Kabbalah soul, with commitment, it's a level. It's a very beautiful level. But there's an even deeper level, which is, I thank God that I'm the one that he entrusts to get up at 3 in the morning to be able to help someone else, even if it's not comfortable at that moment. In other words, it's what is it achieving? What is it doing? Where are you going? That should be the deciding factor and motivator in this question.
Rabbi Markowitz, it looks like you want to chime in on that question, but we actually have a question directed to you which was similar, so I'll read it. This is one of the questions that came in, and then I think you could address both together. Here's the question. What can parents do to create a healthy home environment conducive to healthy growth begashmias of ruchnias? I guess while juggling the challenges of parnasa, shalom bayis, etc.
First of all, since first time I'm taking the mic, I want to also say Yasher Koyach Rabbi Lustig for your beautiful introduction. And Yasher Koyach Rabbi Ephraim and the Mintz family should be in Shama Shadem and Aliyah. And Yasher Koyach for the two, I feel surrounded here by two giants. I'm a small person in the middle. But nonetheless, Rabbi Lu, if I can add, Rabbi Lustig is saying these are two questions. I see it as two completely different questions. And in order I would like to answer first the first question, because Rabbi Lu, to survive with the answer you gave, we need to be a bit more closer to your level. And people like me need some more easier way to survive this, because life is indeed very overwhelming. Now, the MS is that there is a lot to say on this. This itself can be a whole speech, but because I don't want to take so much time, I'm going to share a story with you. It's a bit, I'm going to apologize. You can hold on to your chair if you want. There is a younger man. This is a story some years ago. A younger man that was supposed to, this was when I was in Morristown. A younger man from Muncie was supposed to happen to be not a Lubavitcher. He was going to come teaching for us. in Morristown every day. Right before the school year begins, I was then the Manal and Cheder, and he calls me. I see a call comes in from Eretz Yisrael. I pick up the phone. This young man who lives not far from me says, "I'm sorry, Rabbi Markowitz. It's a week before the school year. I'm not coming. I'm not going to be teaching." Here you have a Manal. You ask a Manal how it feels like when you get a call a week before school begins that you're missing a teacher. What happened was that his son, who just finished yeshiva locally and was going to Eretz Yisrael to learn in yeshiva. This is the beginning of the Zalman, as I told you, a week before the school year. The son went to yeshiva. The father gets a call from an organization called Zaka. Nobody wants to get a call from Zaka ever. That his son got hit by an Egged bus, and they have a plane waiting for him, and they have an escort. He should get ready and come. They didn't tell him that it's over, but that 1 + 1 = 2. He understood that what he's going to. And he's got himself, this is a family, a large family. And when you get a call like this, you don't know if you come or you go. But he knew that he has to rush up. He was on the plane. In no time, he was on an El Al plane. And while he is on the flight, the pilot, Bechvoidoi Ba'atzmai, comes and tells him he just got a message to let him know that it was a mistake, his child is alive. Now, he was indeed hit by the bus, and they first thought he didn't make it, but eventually they realized he survived. But you can imagine that it was 6 to 10 months of trouble. He was not in good shape. And here you have parents with an entire family in Monsey, with a bocher in a hospital in Eretz Yisrael, and you have to come and go, and what a mess of the life of the family is. And I can promise you that every minute of it was just pleasure. These people got their son back from Yenneveld, and all the troubles was pleasure. Their parents, the only way to survive parenting is not by managing your children. If you want advice how to manage, I'm telling you now, you're not going to manage. It's unmanageable. If you want to know how to enjoy them, I can teach you. The only way to survive this is to enjoy them. And I just took an extreme experience to illustrate something. Baruch Hashem, that never anything close to that, but I have, from when I started as a young parent, whatever. There is a lot I can share and say, and I don't think it's important right now. But we need to. One word I will say. A parent comes home after a long day of, the father goes out to make parnasa, whatever the parnasa is. It's not easy. The mother is at home, and if she is at home, or sometimes the mother also has to go for parnasa and has to do laundry and has to take care of the baby. The mother can't wait enough to the father to come home and take over. The father can't wait enough to come home and fall into bed and rest. Obviously, with this you can't survive. But what if a different scenario? That after a long day, a tiring day, you come home and you grab your kid and Baruch Hashem, and you just It's just training your mind. Look at this. I had such a tough day. I had such a hard day. I have my neshama. We would give so much to have a child. People give everything away to have a child. He's here. She's here. And it doesn't matter what type of child even. It's your kid. I had once a story. That's a completely different extreme story in Rabbi Lustig, and you have to stop me because I can stay with this question all night.
I'll stop you after this story.
Okay. I had another story, a very extreme story. And again, I am not giving advice that what has to be. I'm just giving advice on the attitude. A couple, parents came to me, a father and a mother together. They had a disagreement. A very good couple, very good shalom bayis, with both of them dedicated to their kids, and they had some trouble in the family. And Rahman al-Itzlan, one kid in their family had passed away, and one kid had connected to a non-Jewish partner. What's the argument? What was the discussion? The father said, look, I am very open and accepting, and I accepted everything. But that I can't. Ad kan. So I asked the mother, what do you say? So she broke down crying and said, it's my kid, I can't separate. End of story. Nobody should have nisyonis like this, but everybody should have a feeling like this. And when this is the attitude, and when kids are the ones that give us support, what do you mean it's overwhelming? Because it's overwhelming. That's why. My kid is my outlet. My kid is not something that I have to manage. This is I live from. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Markowitz and Rabbi Lou. So I think you're both not arguing. Halacha l'maisa, you both say you have to get up 3 a.m. to be there for your children. You both have to come home from school, be here for your children. Rabbi Lou focused a little more on the Kabbalah.
I never argue with Rabbi Lou. Rabbi Lou is my teacher, my mashpia.
Rabbi Lou also mentioned about the hisbaininus that you have to have in the Kabbalah soil, and then you're saying eventually you'll enjoy it and you'll appreciate it and feel special about it. Thank you. Our next question is actually directed to Dr. Schwarz. Dr. Schwarz, are really good parents and educators born with the talent, or can it be acquired?
That's an interesting question. First, let me ask you, Rabbi Lustig, you introduced me saying I have 40 years as a therapist. And you're not the first one. I'm not on a lot of panels and places like this, but you're not the first one that said 40. It's really 55. So I asked this one speaker who introduced me and said, you're 40. I said, why didn't you introduce me? I wrote it down, 55. He says, it makes you look too old. They won't listen to you.
You have to update your bio on LinkedIn.
They'll think you're a little, Anyhow, up until today, I hadn't seen the ad when Rabbi Mintz spoke with me and asked me to be on this panel. I somehow thought the panel was going to be educators, not parents. And this morning, he wrote me and told me, no, it's going to be parents, not educators. So they asked me to send in a couple questions that might be asked. And interesting enough, I wrote the question that I was sent in to Rabbi Mintz. I said, are educators born that way, or can they be trained? So you're asking the same question about parents. I think they can be. There are parents that can be born good parents. They have good personality characteristics. They just have it. They didn't get taught it. And there are also some parents who were born good parents, but screwed it up. So it doesn't give you a free pass because you're born with those qualities. Now, can you teach or help a parent be a better parent if they don't have the skills? In some cases, for sure. For sure. That human beings can rise above certain characteristics that they either came into this world with or something happened to them along the way. Let's say they grew up in a family of violence and they were one of the objects of the violence. They now move into adulthood and they have a high likelihood of repeating to their children what happened to them without even thinking about it. Now, can a parent who is in that situation get out of that? Yeah, I find in my work, that's a major part of my work, is to work with people, we'll say, who have issues, and can they get out of it? And I can say for sure. Does everybody? Nope. I have to be honest. There are parents who will go to their grave being mean, angry, and that's how they will raise their kids that way. So it's one of those questions I could simply say, it sounds like I'm avoiding it, but I'm not. I'm just telling you what I think is the truth. That yes, some can for sure get over it, and some will not. Not that I'm a Navi, I can't predict, but I know sitting in my office sometimes, I've worked with people that have been into drugs, alcohol, all sorts of things, and at the end of the day, after maybe a long time, they change. We have that capacity to change. That doesn't mean we will, though.
Thank you, Doctor. So Rabbi Lou or Rabbi Markowitz, anybody want to answer that question as well? Go ahead.
Can you repeat the question?
The question was, are really good parents born with the characteristic, with the talent, with the skill, or could you acquire it?
I'll give a one-line answer. Melamdim teachers, rabbis in a classroom are not, you have to be born, not everybody is born. Every single parent is born a parent and can be a parent.
Thank you. Yeah, I think very often the Rebbe stressed that if they were to put you in that position, it means you have the means to accomplish it.
I will also add another line, what that means in practical terms. And a plea, a heartfelt plea. Parents, therapists are very, very important. And sometimes we have to send our children to therapists. But let's not give up the natural matana the Eibishter gave us, which only a parent has. Rabbi, Doctor, Mr., whichever, I'll give him all the titles. David Schwarz is the most top professional. But for my kid, he is not a parent. In what a father and a mother have to offer, no one can replace. So if anything, Doctor, I will send the parents to you to help them figure out how to develop their koiches instead of them being stressed, dealing with the kid and sending him away. Now, that's not to say that, chas v'chalila, that I'm saying not to send to a therapist. Very often we need, and there are situations, but not on the expense of giving up what every single one of us parents have that no one can replace. Thank you.
Thank you. Rabbi Lou, we have a question that was directed to you.
Let me just mention that, of course, everybody is a parent, but as you say, everyone has to develop that skill with help from people who have experience or training. There was a tailor in London, a Bobova, a survivor. Rabbi Shmuel. And he had 2 sons, and one of them got married here, so he went into Yechidus. To the Rebbe. He used to go to the Siches, to the Siches by Mr. Glick, Olav Shalom. And the Rebbe asked him, did the Kala learn in a seminary? And so he said, yes, she learned in Gateshead. She was an American girl. So the Rebbe said that's good that a girl should learn chinuch because not everybody is going to be a teacher, but everybody is going to be a parent. And I tell this every year when I teach chinuch to the oldest classes, that it's important to develop ways and means. Every parent knows it. They find out from their own experience. And I guess that's the way it's supposed to happen. That's in itself the natural way to do it. But that's it.
I think the doctor in the beginning mentioned that even the people who are born with it, they could mess it up. And even the people who are born with it, if I may add, they could still go for training and such events and get better at it, even if they have that, just like the teacher. Good teachers who have it naturally, they come into the classroom and they go for training, they become that much better. So, all right, Rabbi Lusa, here was the question for you. While the formal education of our children is addressed by their teachers and their schools, we as parents educate in a less formal setting. How can a parent be most effective during ordinary moments at home?
I'll just tell you 2 quick stories. I was in Kfar Chabad for a few days on the way to South Africa in Tafshin Lamed Aleph. And I got back, I was with my wife, we got back to Kfar Chabad about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and somebody said, there's a telegram arrived for you. So I went, you had to go to the postman. The postman was Rabbi Kesselman. He was also a mashpia. And on the side, he was a postman to pick up the telegram. And I walked into the house, it's 10:30 at night, and he was sitting with his 10 or 11-year-old son and playing Monopoly. We have Rabbi Kesselman in London. I just told him the story a few weeks ago. He said it's very possible that he was maybe that son at that time. In other words, it's not only when you are going over the work that the children did in school, it's in normal situations. And there's also the famous story of the Frierdiker Rebbe, before he was Rebbe, when he was a young man and he had young daughters, and the Rebbe Rashab went on to Dacha, they went to a country place, miles, days of going with coaches, and the whole Lubavitch moved, all the Ksovim, and there was like, I guess, a couple of minyanim of people, and the Gabbai, the attendant of the Rebbe Rashab, was Reb Chonya Morozov, and he also had daughters, 2 daughters, and the daughters used to play together, and one day they were playing what we call blind man's bluff. I don't know what they call it in Hebrew, Yiddish, but it's a game where one person is it, and they have to wear a blindfold and count to 20, and all the others have to hide. And then when the person says 20, they have to freeze. And the one who is it has to search around blindfolded until they touch the person, and that person becomes it. So they decided to play a game with one of the Morozov girls, she was the youngest. And the other girl did a trick. She became it. She counted to 20, but they cheated a little bit. As soon as she came near, they moved away very quietly, and it was going on for a long time. And suddenly, the door opens, and in walks the 25-year-old Frierdiker Rebbe. And in one split second, he sized up the whole situation, what was happening, and he walked over just near that girl who was it, and she touched him, and he said, okay, I'm it. Give me the blindfold. So the daughters of the Frierdiker Rebbe said, Tata, das ist nicht für dir. That's not for you. They said, this doesn't pass nicht. This is not good for you. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, do you want people to say that your father is a cheater? They said, no. He said, give me the blindfold. And he takes the blindfold, and that second, the door opened, and he's picking up the blindfold. At that second, the door opened, and in walked Chatzafegen. He was sent by the Rebbe Rashab to call the Frierdiker Rebbe. He said, the Tate sucht dir, und du spielst mit Kindern. He said, your father is looking for you, and you're playing with kids. So he said, der Tate sucht sein Kind, und ich such meine Kinder. My father is looking for his child, and I'm looking for my child. And I heard this story from a relative of the Morozovs, from Rabbi Chaikin, actually. And I was very excited because it's a story of teaching moral values to your child. But not while you're reading a Chumash or a Tzanerena or telling Chassidishe Maises, playing a game. And that's why I said the story about the Reb Shlomo Chaim. It means baking a cake and inviting a kid to join you. At that moment, you might feel that you just want to be alone. And you do feel overwhelmed. To me, it's the third level. With respect, what I want to say is that level number one is comfortable. That's dangerous. That's called negligence. Level number two is called duty, Kabbalah soil. But there's a level number three, which is getting a pleasure from doing something at the moment when it's not necessarily that comfortable. So that's, it's that type of thing. A parent gets the opportunity just by communicating, just being there in the day-by-day life with a child is an opportunity to be able to transmit values.
Thank you, Rabbi Lou. Here's another question that came in. It's to the panel. We all know it's with a hakdama. We all know the dangers of criticism and how detrimental it can be if we criticize our children. Here's the question. Are there times and situations in which we actually can and should allow ourselves to criticize? If yes, can you offer some tips and guidance on when and how it could be done? Rabbi Lou, Dr. Schwarz, Rabbi Markowitz. Rabbi Markowitz.
In the Hayom Yom from Yud Beis 7, it says, Ehoiv es abikoires, kihit amitcha lagoivo amiti. You should cherish the criticism because that's going to, what's the translation?
That will lead you to the highest.
To the greatest heights.
That will lead you to the greatest heights. Now, it's a very, in today's world, cherish the criticism. So I'll answer the question direct as it was asked. Is there room for it? Yes. How to do it? 2 conditions, or 3. 1, never give criticism when you are not in a good mood. You have to be in a totally very uplifted place to give criticism. Number 2, never give criticism to the kid when the kid is not in a good mood. The criticism has to come in a moment when the kid is in a good place. The criticism does not have to happen at a time when the kid did something wrong. It can happen the next day in a good moment, and you explain to the kid that was not good. Number 3, at the same time you give a criticism, you should be malbeshit, you should address it with a lot of love and support and compliments at the same time. Thank you. Rabbi Lou, maybe please, if you can, I would like to hear what you want to say.
Yeah, it's very beautiful, especially the last point. There's a rule they say you should have 4 compliments for every criticism. I want to say something else. It just happened to me this evening, just before I came here, and I got called someone. She called me. It was an educational setting, not a parenting, but somebody who had phoned me some weeks ago about a serious problem, and they wanted to expel a pupil. This was like before Yom Kippur, and I had experienced something just like that in England just before, and it was mamish beautiful just before Rosh Hashanah. And I don't want to go into details, but I gave some suggestions, especially it was going to be now sukkahs, this, that. Basically, I was saying, speak, find out. You have to find out what's doing. So tonight, the person said that there's been a great improvement, but this, that, and the other. So I know very often children who are not living up to the standard that we want because they, for whatever reason, peer pressure or yetzer hara or habit or inertia or looking for attention, not relevant. They really don't want to do what we ask of them. And out of respect, out of love, they do something. It must be acknowledged. When you criticize, I said, tell her, it's fantastic. You're 80% of the way there, but I'd like you to try for 85. Get the person moving in that type of a direction. And the other thing is that when a person does something good, praise them. Rabbi Tzvi Greenwald, he was in Eretz Yisrael, Yerushalmi, and he was a Chabadnik, a Mechanech. When Kfar Chabad first started, the Chabad activism in the early 1950s, in the early Tafshin Yuds, he used to go with all the inhabitants of Kfar Chabad were from the Russian Chassidim. They'd been through really rough times. And he would go to the kibbutzim, the fireplaces, at that time, and he would speak very nice about Ahavas Yisrael and good things. So, the Chassidim, the Russian Chassidim told him, you're pussyfooting. You're whitewashing it. Tell it like it is. Give him over the head. These are all these kibbutzniks, they're from Russia, from Poland. They know what it's about. And give it to them. So the next time he was in Yechidus, he told the Rebbe that there's this discussion between him and the other people. And the Rebbe said to him, "Zij weten doch was zij zijn." He said, they know what the truth is. So if you're going to just give them criticism, you're going to create a machitza shel barzel. You're going to have an iron wall between you and them. He said, look for the points that unify you and build on that with that warmth, and then you'll get them to come closer. Now, with a child, there's chesed and there's gevura. There have to be boundaries, and there have to be expectations, and we have to be clear about them, and we have to be consistent about them. But at the same time, especially in today's world, the most effective way is to, as you said, especially your third point, to tinge it with praise.
Shekayach. Thank you, Rabbi Lou and Rabbi Markowitz, for addressing that question. Here's another question from a mother. I have multiple children, same gender and similar age, and although I know how unhealthy and detrimental it is to compare and contrast, I cannot help it. I try my best to not let my thoughts be known, but I wish I didn't even have the thoughts to begin with. Here's the question. Are there any practical ways to prevent ourselves as parents from comparing our children to one another? If there's any practical tips. This mother knows how wrong it is. She's careful not to share it, but she's struggling with it. This question came in today.
Could you repeat what her struggle is?
She wants to know if there's practical ways to prevent ourselves as parents from comparing our children to one another.
I'm thinking if somebody came in my office and said what you just said,
Somebody actually said it.
Yeah,
It's a question
yeah.
that came in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Knowing human beings, first, I can't think of any practical ways. And secondly, if I did have some things, I don't think people really listen to things and integrate them into and change. That's such a profound thing to change. So if somebody's asking sort of for a quick fix, I'd say, I'm not the guy.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so we have a couple of questions that came in that are all very similar. Yeah. Rabbi Lou?
What Dr. Schwarz is saying is 100% right, but the point is, it's we are starting from. It's not that suddenly I have 5 kids. I got a class. It's September the 1st, and I got 30 kids, and now I'm going to start thinking of their sisters, or they're in the shul, who to compare them to. It's your children. It's each person, and each one has special needs. In Gashmias, you have that. It's not just personality-wise. Different children need different nutritional or medicinal, they need different types of things. So you have to have, there's something where you have in common the love and the thanking Hashem for what you have, and being able to see each child and being able to see the advantage of each child, being able to see how each child, when you wonder why so-and-so cannot sing the Sedra like his brother. But that same so-and-so is somebody who's the first to come and to set the table or to greet a visitor or whatever. Look at where their good point is and build it from there.
Thank you. Okay, we have many questions that came in.
In one sentence to elaborate, I would like to give a practical tip.
Okay.
I have a practical tip for the mother. If the children are important and special because of their mila, then there is no eitzah. But if the child is important because they are my child, then there is no question.
Okay. So we have a lot of questions on this theme. I'll read 2-3 of them, and hopefully we'll be able to address. The shortest one came in as follows. How does one relay Yerushalayim and Chassidishe values to children? Another one came in a little more wordy. There's so much excitement outside of Yiddishkeit that draw the attention of our children, especially in today's world. What can parents do to foster deeper interest and enthusiasm in Torah mitzvahs, especially in davening, which seems to be most challenging? And a similar question came in. How do you transmit to a child, 14 years old, from the rest of the question, it looks like 8th grade, the geschmack and interest in Yiddishkeit and learning when they don't understand what they daven, and the Gemara about Eidim Zaymimim has nothing to do with them, with him. Rabbi Markowitz, one of them was addressed to you. The other two are open.
Before I answer the question, I will ask you, Rishus, I can only answer the question if you give me enough time.
Should we save it for the end?
I think
Because we have a lot of other questions. Or this is a big one, so maybe this one has to be like a presentation.
Okay.
All right, let's try to get some more questions out of the way, and then we'll come back to this theme, which is a very big theme. Okay. Sorry? No, it's just...
Rabbi Lustig, I just want to urge you that we have time for this question whenever it is, because this is a question that we get every day, and at the end of the day, you're talking to parents that this is what they're dealing with, and it needs to be addressed.
No, I'm not looking to push it off. I'm looking to give it its bracha kaved.
You also asked earlier, you addressed a question to me, which we didn't get back to, so we'll do that together when we get to this one.
Okay, another question, which is also similar, 2 questions. So this one, the Rebbe often spoke how in this generation chesed is so needed, and yet at the same time the Rebbe spoke of the need for Kabbalas oil. What is the right balance between the two? A similar question, I think, is while discipline is important in chinuch and parenting as in consequences for misbehavior? What is the most effective way to discipline my child without negative results? So people are seeking the balance of the disciplining, the Kabbalah soil with the chesed. Dr. Schwarz, could we start with you?
Finding that balance takes what I call wisdom. And how do you find wisdom as a parent in your life when you're doing so many things just to keep your head above the water? I'll use a sort of a little, I just thought of kind of a little thing. Sometimes people, in my office, I must have 1,000 books on therapy. I have a few Jewish books, and they're not in the place that everybody looks at. They look at the titles, and sometimes a person says to me, can I borrow one of your books? And then I'll say, what title attracts you? And they'll tell me a title. And I'll say to them, you'll never learn anything from these books. If you have a problem falling asleep at night, I'll give you one of my books. You'll be asleep in about 2 minutes. So they said, well, what are you learning? I said, we learn things, sometimes I'll say, to read a book not by a scientist, but read a book by a person who's going through something similar, or I'll sometimes say writers who write novels know about the human condition much better than people in my field sometimes. And then I'll say, hang out with the people who you think have wisdom. It will rub off on you. Just as if you hang out with people who have no wisdom, interesting enough, that also will rub off on you. So you got to be around people, human beings, and maybe it could be your neighbor. You don't know. You have to be around them and eventually have a relationship where you can learn from them, even if it's simply by observation. Because there's some people who they say great things, but in real practice, in my office, I see what I call the reality of life. Some people can look great to the world. I can look great to the world, but I can do some rotten things too. You have to look and find the people in your life who could teach you something, and you can be less defensive and learn from them and find that wisdom.
Thank you. I can tell you that very often I work with, go ahead. Very often I work with new teachers who've gone to hours and hours of training in the summer, and they sat and they met with people. And when school starts and we give them the opportunity to visit another veteran teacher's classroom, that's the most powerful thing to them. Just witnessing it and seeing the reality of the classroom and the teaching. And they all express that that's way more powerful than any, all the tens of hours.
A simple answer on the discipline, just a one-line answer.
Sure. So we have a lot of questions to get
on
to.
the question of discipline, there is a letter from the Rebbe. The Rebbe writes to someone that the Chazal say it has to be yemin mekareves and small doicha. Yeah, with the right hand you're mekarev, with the left hand you push away. If you have to discipline, if you have to do something negative, it should be with the weaker hand. And the Rebbe writes to him that if you overdo in yemin mekareves, no, nicht gefährlich. You overdid in vehaftel racha kamoicha. If you overdo in small doicha, that's not so. That's a problem. So a simple answer on what to do with discipline is two things. Number one, for discipline to work, needs to be in an environment of kindness and warmth. In an environment of negativity, in Yiddish, Ungezeugenkeit, nervous and tension, in an environment like this, there is no room for discipline. But in a yahrtzeit environment, there is room for discipline. And the eitzah is you say, Moshe, you cannot have this. And sometimes, if you had to discipline, let's say you had to take something away from your kid because it's not shaykh, it's a good idea to compensate with something else to calm his need. In other words, you didn't give in. You needed to stop the kid from a certain thing, and you didn't give in. But it's okay to do something else outside of that area to help the kid feel better, and then you bring a healthier situation.
Thank you. Before we continue with the next question, I just want to say two things. Number one, we apologize in advance if we don't read your question. I doubt we'll get to all of them. I'm trying to group them together. Number two, anybody who's standing in the back, we have plenty of seats up front. You're more than welcome to come all the way in. So we have two questions about a smartphone, and Rabbi Lou, you mentioned that in the opening presentation tonight. And Dr. Schwarz, I think you've lectured extensively about this. So here are the two questions about a smartphone. One is from a mother. Kids come home and want to use the phone. They're almost addicted to using the phone. What to do? Mother can't always refuse. And a father wrote in, is a smartphone, by definition, a churban for a father? Rabbi Lou and Dr. Schwarz, we have a father and mother reaching out about smartphones.
I look at it like it is an addiction. And what's an addiction? An addiction is that you're attracted to something, but the something that you're attracted to has to have something negative about it. And when you try to stop doing this thing, whatever you're addicted to, you can't stop. You might try to take the object away from a person. You might try to put filters on it, but 6-year-olds know how to get around certain things that full adults can't even comprehend with some of these objects. I believe in treating any addiction. It's when somebody wants something that's harmful. How do you stop? If you take the harmfulness object away, it doesn't work. It'll work temporarily, but eventually the person's going to want to go back for it. And they'll find a way, a friend. I find in my experience, and I spent a number of years and still do, in the addiction field, that a person has to, I'll use the expression, you got to get a life. If you don't get a life, you're going to go back to these things that give you pleasure. When you have a life, it doesn't give you the pleasure that you might have had before. You no longer care yourself about that object. If you don't have a life, what's a life? A life is where your existence has something meaningful about it. If it has no meaning to you, if you just go through life going from this to that, but there's no care about something of deepness, you don't have a life. You're living a shallow life. Some people live their shallow life their whole lives. And they get addicted to different things because these things give temporary pleasure. There are people who spend their whole time on a phone, their waking hours. Now, how does a human being change? You take the phone away? That doesn't change it. It might change it for the moment, but not in the long run. So, a kid, if all his happiness is in an object, a phone, if you're looking for a quick answer, taking it away, I know kids, they're going to get around that quickly. As an example, one of my friends, he's a therapist in Borough Park, said to me, he has 2 phones, a flip phone and a smartphone. He says, when I'm out in public, I have to use the flip phone because people look at me like you shouldn't have a smartphone. He says, but I use a smartphone. But I can't show that to the public because they'll think I'm addicted to this smartphone and I'm watching the wrong stuff. So he says, I have 2 phones. That's not, and he's a smart guy. So he's still sort of caught up into it. You have to, first you have to have a life yourself. If you don't have a life yourself, forget it. You're not going to teach another human being how to have a life. If you have a life, there's a chance that you can teach your children and other people around you what it means to have a life. With that expression, it's a very powerful expression. And when a person has a life, those things don't have an attraction anymore.
So what about the mother? And this is to everybody on the panel. The mother is having a hard time. Her kids come home from school. Her smartphone's there somewhere in the house. They nudge her for it, and she can't refuse them. But she's looking for a eitzah.
Well, what I just said in the last 5 minutes is not such a simple thing to do. But if she's looking for a simple answer, I don't think there is one.
Okay, in the opening presentation, Rabbi Lou mentioned that when a parent comes home from work, and this is not to argue with the doctor, if you're addicted, you'll get around it. But if you're not addicted, but you need to control yourself, then turn off your phone for 2 hours. So I just wanted to share, there's a shliach.
See, if you knew how to communicate with people in such a good way, when you come home, you'll be drawn to the people, the human beings in your life. You won't be drawn to the object. When you're drawn to the object, you're like looking over the reality and going into the objects are all fantasy. They're real, they're physically real, but it's fantasy. It's not a real relationship. There are people who talk to friends face to face and are also talking on the phone at the same time.
But I think nevertheless, even the people who mean well and that are good and they're not addicted, it's a huge distraction.
That's right.
And simply closing your phone and putting it away for those 2 hours is useful. We're not fighting addiction here. We just don't want the distraction. So I wanted to share, there's a shliach in Ohio. He reached out to me, asked me if I could be involved with promoting this app. I never even thought I would mention it here tonight. But so the problem is a lot of people have a hard time closing their phone for 2 hours because they have another kid who's by an after-school program. They're expecting an important phone call. The doctor said they're going to return the call later. So they cannot turn their phone off for 2 hours. So there are different ways around that. You could give out your landline or have a flip phone at home. But there's an app, a shliach developed this app called the present mode. And you just tap the app, it turns it on your phone, and it blocks everything, all notifications. And if you pick up your phone by mistake, because you're just used to doing it, it reminds you that you're in present mode, and nothing comes and goes, but phone calls could come through. And if anybody texts you then, or WhatsApps you privately, not in groups, you get an automatic reply that says, hi, I'm in present mode right now, I'm not looking at my notifications, I'll get back to you later. If it's urgent, call. So the phone calls could go through. And then the people who are close to you in your life who are important, like your children, and they know that if they need to reach you in these hours, your phone's on present mode. You got to call. It certainly helps, not for an addiction, but it helps for the distraction. You could check it out, the present mode.
I know a young man who told me this. He was married, and maybe once every 2 or 3 months, he would get together with his yeshiva friends who he grew up with. They were in the same class, and they'd go to a restaurant together. And they're in the restaurant, and one of the guys in the restaurant, probably about 10 guys, took a picture of the friends, and they were all on their phones in the restaurant with their friends, talking to somebody else. So, but they saw it, and they say, what are we doing? So they made a deal. I think it's a cool deal. This was the deal. When they went into the restaurant, they all put their phones in the center of the table. And if anybody reached out and took their phone, you paid for the meal, for everybody.
Did it work?
I thought it worked. It worked. I don't know if it works today, but this was a few years ago.
Okay.
He told me that.
Yes. Rabbi Lou wants to add something.
I agree 100% with Dr. Schwarz about, at the end of the day, it's not thing, it's about people. A very famous outreach person, not Chabad, but I know him from previous life, and I met him a few years ago, and he said, "What? With them making all these big things?" I said, "At the end of the day, you can try everything, delay with a child as much as you can when they become allowed to take it." And a parent just asked me now this year, "On what grounds you're using it yourself?" I said, "A driving license. You have to be a certain age. You have to explain that you have to be trained." But in the long run, we don't know how much more technology is going to encroach in the next 5, 10 years, and the only way is by inspiring the kids. People are inspired, like you call getting a life. That person doesn't need it. It's something like Shmira Shabbos was 100, 150 years ago in England or in New York. People said it's impossible. There were so many distractions. And you find ways. You find ways. The idea of turning off the phone for an hour or two is based on an answer that Rebbe gave to a mother. And he said that she should not, it was before smartphones or any phones, mobiles. But the Rebbe said, don't answer the phone during supper time. To repeat it for your children. I'm talking about in the home. And we had someone from TAG, from America, came, he spoke to the parents, and he said, we have every year, we have a presentation nowadays on Zoom for all the parents, and another one for the teachers. And he said that there are certain mitzvahs that you either did it or you didn't do it. Like eating matzah, a kazayas matzah on Pesach, if you ate a half a kazayas matzah, you didn't get the mitzvah. But there are other mitzvahs which, if you did part of it, it's still a mitzvah. Like you're supposed to give 10% to tzedakah. If you gave 5%, it's still tzedakah. So he said if you can arrange, it's not, you cannot tell the kids you can't have your phone on from 6 to 7 or from 4 to 6 or whatever it is. We all do it. Everyone puts it in the middle of the table. Everybody puts it in the middle of the table. It's something which it's showing something. The girls, I'm in the girls' high school, and obviously I'm not close there with them, but a lot of the teachers are former pupils, and they share with me different things, and I saw certain people that really had yeridas, and not because of the phone, because of the addiction and because of Shabbos. And I made for myself, and I don't know what to do. What I did was, I made a hachlota for myself about 4 years ago, and about every 3 or 4 months, we have an assembly every Friday, and every few months I remind them that I turn off my phone 1 hour before Shabbos, and I don't turn it on until at least 1 hour after the Zman. Except in very, very exceptional pikuach nefesh type of situations. And I say that because I figured, so they'll say that meshugana, but at least to them, Shabbos will be Shabbos. Now, one of the girls, it was surprising, but I was taking a class. This girl was about 17, and she picked up and she said, "Do you remember you spoke about that a few months?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I tried it. I tried it this week. I turned off my phone and I said, how did you feel?" And she said, "I felt empowered. I felt strong." And I was happy because all the other kids heard this. You're showing people it's something. It's a step in the right direction. But ultimately, say if you are a parking meter, everything you want is a device. You have to do it. The Uber and getting airline tickets, everything is done online today. So what we need is to inspire our kids, give them something Make it enjoyable. When we had Shidurim of the Rebbe, we had live broadcasts. The Farbrengen started 9:30. So the worst place country was England, because it was 2:30 in the morning. It ended too late to go to bed, but it's too early to get up. It was like a funny time. And I offered my kids, I never told them to come. I offered them to come. When we had these things, we had like a lot of people coming. But one thing, I spent what would today be equivalent about $50 on chocolate and other stuff. I said to my wife, whatever it is, the kid's going to know that this is a great time. And with things which are not the most delicious on a superficial level, make sure you give something into it. Make sure you give something into it. I met a kid this Sukkot. It was actually one of my grandchildren, maybe, and in Pittsburgh. And I said to him, "Are you enjoying Yom Tov?" He said, "Yes." I said, "What did you like the most?" This is probably the Shabbos Chalamoid. I said, "What did you like the most?" And he said, "Shaking the Lulav Esrik," because he had his own Lulav. The kid's about 8 years old. So I said, "And what about all the good meals you had? And what about all the sitting and hearing stories and stuff?" He says, "That I have every Shabbat," he said. But this was something special. So, it's a different, and that same child, don't take anyone for granted. Just give them experiences, point them out to the kids, show it's something enjoyable. If a person gets up and says, "Oh, Nebuch, I got to go to the Shia now, and I'm going to," with the krecht, it's not useful. I heard from a non-Chabad Rav. He said that in the 1930s, in the recession years, in the depression years, and there were many people, they lost their jobs. They went into work on Friday. They said, "I'm not coming tomorrow." The employer very often was a Jew. And he said, "If I come in, you can come in. If you don't come in, don't come back Monday." This happened with thousands and thousands of people, and Shabbos was lost. Now, they tell the story about somebody whose family, they maintained Yiddishkeit. So they asked, my father came home, we got a pink slip or whatever it was to dismiss him. He took a thumbtack, he put them all on the wall. That was his pride. So I was brought up that there's values that are more important than the superficial lifestyle that everybody's running after, that are deeper and more fulfilling. These things, Rabbi Yitzchak Block, Dr. Block, Olav Shalom, and they asked him about his kashrus. It was right after Gimel Tammuz. He gave a talk to 150 people in London. They said, how can we give the feeling for the Rebbe to our children? So it was the time when on the planes they started saying, "Put on your own mask before you help your children." He said, "Put on your own mask." If the child will feel that atmosphere, and it will communicate itself, and this is what I was talking about, that the people would know that it's not even from 4 to 6, it can be from 6 to 7, whatever it is. A certain time in this house when we're here for each other, and that includes the parents.
Shkayach. So once again, we apologize. We probably won't be able to get to all the questions, and we still have the very big questions that came in. We're leaving for the end. So we'll try to get to, I think, 2 or 3 more before that, and then we'll conclude the evening. So here is a question. If I'm reading this correctly, how can one, either it says induct or induce your partner into participating of everyday parenting activity with the realization that they are our bracha and not our burden? One parent needs help convincing the other parent, father, mother, father, that to participate in the everyday parenting, there's a lot of tasks involved, with the realization that it's a bracha and not a burden. Markowitz, I think you addressed it before. Yeah, doctor.
That's like, how do you make a relationship, a marriage, where one is depressed and the other one's not? How does the one who's not influence the one that is? It's like if I heard that in my office in the first session, I think this is going to be a while. That's changing a basic attitude of somebody is indifferent about something and somebody loves something, and the one who loves it wants the indifferent one to love it like they do. That's a big problem.
All right.
Not a quick, to me.
Sounds like we need a whole session for this one. So we'll move on. Okay, we'll move on. Here's the question. Rabbi Lou mentioned a little about confidence. Can the psychologist speak about it specifically in young children/infants? So Dr. Schwarz, the question is to you, I guess, about instilling confidence in your children, young children specifically, very young children.
Yes, you can instill confidence in very, very pre-verbal human beings. You can, almost from birth. They did a study. They took babies, and they wanted to see when do they recognize their mother for breastfeeding, and when, if you introduce another woman, when will they recognize that that's not their mother? They don't know the concept mother. I think it was 15 days, which means a child's mind at 15 days can absorb something. They're not just objects. There's something there that tells you you can have an effect on somebody. Now, I see it sometimes in the other way. I see parents fight or anger. It's one of the worst things. A kid, pre-verbal, absorbs the feeling, the atmosphere of anger, and it affects him. So that's the negative stuff. If they can be affected by the negative stuff at a pre-verbal age, they can sure be affected by the positive stuff also at a pre-verbal age.
Thank you. Yeah, we know the Rebbe encouraged even expecting mothers not to go to see animals or certain images, and even young children should be surrounded with positive images of Yiddishkeit and Chassidishkeit.
The Rebbe was a genius in my mind in understanding the human condition, clearly, beyond any psychologist that I've ever worked with or knew about. He understood that stuff at genius level.
Okay, so we'll do one last question about sibling rivalry, and then we'll go to the big question of the night. So this question came a bit long. I'm going to try to shorten it. But I have 6 children, ages 8 to 15. They're highly competitive. They wrestle physically and emotionally. Sometimes they hurt each other both ways. They have expectations of their siblings. They get upset at the siblings when they do things that they themselves do. Bottom line, the end of the question ends off, what suggestions could you share for promoting kids treating each other respectfully and giving each other space for self-expression? Rabbi Markowitz. You'll answer it together with the big answer. Rabbi Lou, I think you have a large family. Can I know?
The professor said he used to have 10 theories and no kids, and now he has 10 kids and no theories.
So you need siyata d'shmaya.
You need siyata d'shmaya, but you need to work on it. It's a tremendous advantage for children to be brought up with other people and to teach them how to appreciate each other. It's very possible. And you sit around and you tell them, don't pit them one against the other. You talk about you are the diamonds over here, like Rabbi Markowitz says. Let them feel we are a family, building up the idea that we are a family together. And it needs a lot of pushing, and you have to speak to each child individually. You You have a large family. I heard that Mrs. Afton, Reverend Chayena Afton, Allah Shalom, one of her children told me that she had 15 children also, and that she used to have designated time every week that she called into her room every one of the kids, one day a week, for 10 minutes or 50, just a short conversation.
Quality time.
It's talking to your children. It doesn't have to be in that type of a formal way, but talking with them, explaining to them why this thing is like this and this is like that, and the children absorb it. I know somebody who's a great grandparent, but that person was not from Chabad Chinuch, but from. And they went and they were at university, whatever, they wandered away for a couple of years. And the father was a professional, he was also not a rabbi, but from a Yid. And Bidak Nefesh, and this person told me he was about 75 years old. And he says, my biggest regret in life, he was about 2 years that he was not as he should have been. And I never asked him to what extent or what it was. He said, my father used to speak to me and talk to me about it. And he died. He had Yenamachle. He didn't die from heart or anything. But he died before I was able to tell him that every single word he ever told me was absorbed. But it took time to take root. The expectations were made. He said what he said, and he had the patience, and he said, when I was 22, 21, 22, I didn't really relate to it, and when I was 24, 25, I did. But every word was there. So to talk with your children, and you speak about values, and children sometimes will ask, why is so-and-so doing this and I cannot do it? Then you have an answer for it. That's that journey. You're on your journey. But together we're a family. We are all like part of a great treasure together. That's what we have tried to do all the years with our own children. Once a year I write them a thing. I write, dear precious diamond. That's instead of saying dear kids or dear family, that's it. And it's something that's throughout. And I learned this from my mother, Allah Shalom. And she had like 8 children in the 1930s and 40s, which was it was bigger than having 15 today. Both economically and socially, she always got the award on Mother's Day for the largest family when she went to these different events. And they said, what do you have? She said, I have $8 million, she used to say. Each one's like $1 million. The child should feel that this is the greatest, most precious thing that the parent has. And we as a family are a unit which have that sense of fulfillment and of solidarity and unity. And sometimes you expect sibling rivalry to be between children who are within 2 years of each other's age. But when some children were married before the other one was born, in many families, in large families, and yet you can find that they're highly, highly diverse. I know in our family they're very, very diverse. But there's an achdus that was instilled in them. And we all know, and I've met many people, that we're in families of 2 people and they didn't talk for 10 years or something. It's not the number. It has to do with just, it's trying to cultivate and to radiate in the home an atmosphere of simchas hachayim, that this is good, this is the best thing in the world. It's not easy. It's not noach. But it's precious.
Thank you. Okay, so for the last question of the night, the one that came in the most, perhaps, I'll reread one of them. There's so much excitement outside of Yiddishkeit that draw the attention of our children, especially in today's world. What can parents do to foster deep interest and enthusiasm in Torah mitzvahs, especially in davening, which seems to be most challenging? And then we had the parent who wrote in about their 14-year-old boy who wants to know what Eidim Zaymim has to do with them, doesn't understand what he's davening, and how does one relay Yiras Shamayim to their children? Rabbi Markowitz.
First of all, there is so much to say, and I'm going to try to be mitzamtzem as much as possible. But one very important thing regarding all these specific questions, especially the last one with the sibling rivalry, it is very different when somebody who is coming to start a family or has a young family and wants to create a situation and wants to know, which was one of the questions Rabbi Lustig addressed to me, which we didn't get to answer, how do you create a healthy family? And it's a very different situation and answer when you're dealing with a family past that situation, and it's not an ideal situation in the family, and that's very different. So you cannot just answer a question like that, because we need to know what we're dealing with. A mother once asked me, what do I do if my 12-year-old tells me, I'll kill you? So I answered her, when my 4-year-old tells my 3-year-old, you're crazy, I say, hey! That's all. Like, wow, crazy? So if my 4-year-old told my 3-year-old, wow, when they said crazy, so then when they'll be 12, they won't say to the mother, I'll kill you. So, and that's an other discussion, which I was going to start before, answer that question, how to create a healthy home, which, by the way, is a question for secular people as well. This is not dafka question in this room. I would like to go to the question, Rabbi Lustig, you asked last, and as much as we can cover, in a little bit of the smartphone question can be included in it, b'derech mamela. I'll share with you an experience, a little bit with a couple stories. And there is a story that the Rebbe talks about. The Sikha came out Tavshin Mem 43 years ago. The Rebbe said the Sikha even earlier, but in Kuta Sikhas that week it came out. It was when I read the Sikha first in the Mems, I learned that Sikha. The Rebbe says a story about the Rebbe Rashab coming into the Tzemach Tzedek when he was a young kid and crying why he can't see why the Eibishter came to Avraham Avinu by Pashas Vayero. The Eibishter came to visit Avraham Avinu after the Bris Milah, and why Hashem can't. I also want to see Hashem, and he was crying. The Rebbe says the story, nice Sikha, and the punchline of the Sikha is the Rebbe says that this story opened a zinner, a new channel, a chiddush, that from that story, that in today's day, we have the power to get our kids to a place that they can cry, not because they want a candy, they can cry because they want to see Hashem. I'm reading that Sikha, and I'm saying to myself, Azah Heilige Rebbe, what a big holy man this is. But let's be realistic. It would be nice, Azah Tzadik. But this doesn't sound in any way realistic. More years go by, and I learn a little bit more of what's happening here, and I get to know a little bit what's happening. And as Dr. Schwarz said before, describing the Rebbe as this big genius, anybody that learned anything and watched anything about the Rebbe knows that the Rebbe is the most practical, down-to-earth, realistic person who has turned the world over with all his ideas. But Poel Mamash, it never existed a being that did so much. And I'm saying to myself, like, how does it go together? This is a realistic person. Rabbi Isai, I can tell you today that you'll be surprised to hear. I'm sorry to brush away answers from all therapists, but this is the only thing that can actually work. Just forget about trying any other professional methods. This is the only medicine, and he is very practical, and the Rebbe says something very unique. And let me share with you a little bit what I mean. So when I grew up, when I was a little kid, I learned in Cheder, in Satmar Cheder, and this is over 50 years ago, and it was the old school mentality, and the way to keep children disciplined was mit das Stecken. Ich will es nicht sagen in Englisch. Now, don't just be so, it's Satmar. Ich hab gehört, sehr gut für eine Sachle Babitsche Kinder, my age, people in Chabad, that are sharing with me from the 40s and the 50s, their rabbis did the same thing in Lubavitch. So that's the old school mentality. By the time I became a Malamed myself, the Rebbe wrote to me, and by the way, that's the answer for asking if someone was asking me who I got license from. The only one I got license from is from the Rebbe. The Rebbe told me numerous times to do this in different ways of answers. And in 1984, the Rebbe finally told me, so it's 39, not 40. In 1984 is when I formally started, although I did it before that, not formally. So when I became a Rebbe, as the years were going on, the world was starting to change. We learned already, the Stecken wird nicht arbeiten. That stick is not going to work. And the more they started to learn that you need to give candy, and it started by a small candy, and it went to a bigger candy, and it went to trips, and it went to bigger trips. Well, Rabbi Isai, there is no candy or no trips that can compensate for what they have much better fun. So if you think you're gonna convince any kid today to learn because you get a candy, very temporary, in very simple level kids will go for it. But anybody which a little starker chevreman, his smartphone, let's call it, because that's what we are talking about, is much more fun. Aber a Yid hat a neshama. And you can't help it. That neshama does work because everything else is sheker, and that's emes. And I want to share with you something. So I have a chevreman that, you know what? I'll start to an extreme. I was dealing with a bocher, and I had a similar story, one with a bocher from a Litvish background, and one with a bocher from a Chassidishe background, other Chassidim. Happened to be, this was not a Lubavitch story. And a bocher who comes to me, and a sweetheart of a boy, Rebbeinu Shalom, a doll, who never completely lost it. Completely lost it. Ad kedei kach, that he connected with a Goyishe girl. And I'm telling him, Yankele, sidach du a so viel scheine meidlich, jüdische meidlich, was darfst du a Goye? Like, isn't there enough beautiful girls, Yiddisha? Why do you need a goy? And he looks at me and he said to me, Rebbe, like, you don't know that I'm not religious? He Pasha didn't have what I want from him. I don't keep Shabbos. So I said, but what? Aber sie doch nicht kein jüdischer Mädel. So he says, nobody ever told me anything about that. I was just told what I need to do. And all of a sudden I hopped that, wait, but in his upbringing, we're not talking about the mile of, so we're teaching the kids what we need to do. And I jumped a similar situation, which I had with a Chassidishe Malamed, who tells me, he came to me totally in panic. He was teaching in class, and they were learning Gemara, and in the process of learning, they were having a discussion. Why is it that a goy can become a yid, but a yid cannot become a goy? And they were talking in halacha why it is. And then an innocent boy, he tells me, an innocent tzaddik, not a troublemaker. An innocent boy says, Avada der Eibishter gedacht machen, wir sollen nicht gerne werden a goyim, sondern man doch alle gewollt werden goyim. Should I translate? For sure, the Eibishter needed to make it this way. We would, all of us, would want to be goyim. We are in one way better because by default, even if we don't pay attention, the noise that the Rebbe put into our ears, wie groß and wie gewaltig a Yid is enough that usually for a kid being brought up in this environment is going to understand maybe that detail better, the most of it. Even without doing anything, just by walking around this and just walking through our system, we hear enough. However, Rabbi say it's not enough. It's not enough. Now, I want to make one important statement here. In all my years of doing this, I very much have almost like, I'm like, this is to me a very important thing that my job, the Rebbe told me to be a machanech, I will give tips and aids how to deal with the situation. I'm not a mashpia. Rabbi Lu is the mashpia. I'm not the mashpia. And therefore, I was always holding back from giving, learn Chassidishe, all these. I never, like being a role model, this is. So I had a situation with another question that Rabbi Lustig and I had discussed, and it didn't come up. A father asked me, Rabbi Markowitz, look, you see me? You see, I'm like very, like, let's call it balbatish. I don't like the word light, so we'll call it balbatish. I want my kid to look better than me. What should I do? Should I tell him to do something different than I do? I'm a hypocrite. Should I tell him to be better? I'm a hypocrite. Should I tell him to be the same? I mean, I want him to be better. What should I do? That's a tough question, Rabbi Lu. The emes is I would love to hear what you answer, but I need to finish this first. But I would love to hear what you answer on this. But so I'll tell you this question in the context in what it came, and I'm using the answer that I gave, because one thing for sure, I'm not going to tell anybody to be a role model and to be a chassid, because I am not. But I'm answering a practical tip. What I'm talking about now and where I'm heading to is simple, a practical tip, and the only practical tip that's going to work on this topic that we are addressing, including on this shaila the father asked. So I'll tell you the setting where how this shaila was asked. It was a Shabbos, a Shabbaton, what we call, a Shabbaton of a community, of a Balbatish community, and they invited me to be part of it. And Friday night, one of the guys, who is actually one of the head of the Balbatish community, after we had a Friday night meal, it was very beautiful. Then the families, the mothers and the kids more or less left, and the men were staying together, and we started to sing. And they were singing, and mitamol, I'm sitting there, and I'm watching yahrtzeit negunim, geschmack negunim, and I see that this Balbatish guy, who, trust me, he is Balbatish by all means, and he just, all of a sudden, he was a guy that singing was very much, he had a geschmack in singing, and he forgot a minute that he's Balbatish. His eyes were closed, and he was like just singing away with closed eyes, and I'm looking at him, and I'm watching it, and I'm enjoying it. Motzei Shabbos, this guy is asking me this question. In Motzei Shabbos, we had a formal parenting session. And I said to him, I don't want to embarrass you, but I want to share with you something that I watched. And I said like this, I will give 3 tips, answers to you as a father, what you can do that your kid should be better than you. Number 1, every one of us in the room has a soft spot. Wir alle haben dich an der Schumme. Everyone has a soft spot that talks to us, that gets us going. I don't want to come and tell you to change, to be a role model. I'm very practical. I understand this is not where you're at. But one thing that you have a geschmack in, go for it. Don't hide it. Es passt nicht for a Balbatish guy. No. You can be Balbatish, and you could have your chesroinus. Find what area in Yiddishkeit, what gets your neshama going, and go for it all the way. Overdo it. That's one eitzah. Eitzah number 2, I said, areas that you are very weak in, but you want to convince the kid, tell him, Bubala, unfortunately, I missed the boat on that one. I didn't do good in yeshiva, and it just didn't click for me. Let's do it together. You'll do it, you'll be, and it will help me, and we'll do it together. And it's okay to say this. But you're not revealing anything to him. He knows, he sees you. So that's not being a hypocrite. I'm in a situation where I don't have it. Let's do it. We'll do it together. And number 3, I told him, which is not important, relevant to this conversation, but I said to him, Nicht jeder Weire, wo du tist, darf der Kind wissen. It's okay to be a hypocrite, that not every grobe thing that you do, some of the things that you're struggling with, live in your bedroom. Anyway, back to the Nakuda, what brings what's Negea here. So I had a guy, a Chassidishe guy, another extreme, a younger man came into me, mamash, I get a call from this younger man. He is 3 months after the Chasana, a Chassidishe younger man from other Chassidim. He needs to talk to me. No, and I ask him, what's the topic? Will nicht reden auf dem Telefon, doesn't want to speak on the phone. He wants to see me. So I already imagined, you get these calls every day, yahrtzeit, shalom bayis, other Yiddishkeit, other. In comes in a younger man that like almost a light bulb went on. A edelkeit and a shama, it was just a pleasure to look at him. And I'm looking, what does he want? And he says, look, I come from a community I grew up very protected and very strict and I got married, but I feel that he even told me, interesting how, he says, in our community, I don't know if you know, but our community is very stark. Like Lemushel, from 1 to 25, we are at 24. It was an interesting, usually say 1 to 10. He was like, I didn't know where he took this from 1 to 25. I said, okay, so what's the problem? He said that, he feels he's starting to lose it. He's starting to lose it. He doesn't know what. So I told him, I want to tell you. I'll explain to you what you're asking and I'll give you the answer. And I said to him, everything in this world has a guf and a nefesh, which was a chiddush to him. I said, told him that you see this table that's right here, that has a guf, but it also has a neshama, a nefesh. He says, this has a nefesh? I said, yeah, if it doesn't have a nefesh, it's not here. So I explained to him, but everything has a guf and a nefesh. I said, Yiddishkeit also has a guf and a nefesh. Your community built a gewaltige structure. The structure of the way your community is built is gewaltig. Alavai of mir gesucht. This is like a strong guf, a strong structure, in a protected structure. But you know what? Everything, a structure that has a guf, that has no neshama, will dissolve. Rabbi say, all communities, regardless, andere Chassidim, Litvish, modern, in Chabad, the chilik is nor. I want to show you something. I have in my pocket, Bashgocha Protis, I have this little MP3 player. What's this? A USB stick. On this USB, I have 2,500 10-minute clips from the Rebbe. Now, again, going back to Dr. Schwarz said that the Rebbe is a genius in psychology, but every single person, every one of the old Chassidim, you take Chassidim who are bechlal in a completely different league. Alte Chassidim was maskilim and Chassidus on the highest level. They come after Tafshin Yud, they hear the Rebbe Maimorim, and they're just going crazy. They're blown away. This is like, that level of Chassidus has never been said. Every Baal Nigla in the world, the biggest giants in Nigla, looked at the Rebbe and said, where is this coming from? Every great professor, every great psychologist. And you know what? In this little stick, there is not the heavy Nigla, there is not the heavy Chassidus, there is not psychology. Ein Sach, the Rebbe talking to the men, sometimes women, and sometimes children, just telling us how special we are. We have a neshama, the Eibishter hat uns lieb, how big the Eibishter, that's all. And you may wonder, if you listen to this every day, and you may wonder, it's like he's such a simple man. So, to give someone work, we are people, we are working, we have difficult lives. There is so much going on. So to come and to start learning and I can't. I don't have the koiches. But if we want our structure of Yiddishkeit to last, not more than 5 minutes. And in so many letters, the Rebbe is asking, listen, I can give you gewaltige tips, which I didn't get to tonight, how to create a healthy home, which a secular home can create too. But if you want, you know the funny thing is that most of the easiest thing in chinuch is to teach children what to do and what not to do. That's just academic. And 90% of our relationship is about this. Stop giving instructions. It doesn't need it. They know it. They learned the cheder. They learn it later on their own in yeshiva. They heard it once. They know it. You want to give something? Give excitement. And if excitement you cannot give in words, excitement you give with excitement. Ich will do ending. Thank you very much for listening.
So we would like to conclude by, first of all, thanking all of you, all the parents, for coming out here tonight for this very long and informative evening. Thank you very much to our panelists, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Markowitz, Dr. Schwarz. Thank you so much for your sharing all your insights with us. Thank you very much to the Mintz family. And perhaps we can make a few minyan and ma'ariv over here. We have a few chiyuvim. And thank you, everybody, for joining.